The wind howled through the narrow dirt road outside the small wooden house. It was a cold evening, the kind that made the trees creak and the windows tremble. Inside the tiny home, Martha sat near the fireplace with a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her house was small and worn, but it was warm, and that warmth was the only comfort she had after another exhausting day. Martha was poor. Everyone in the town knew it. After her husband died 5 years ago in a ranch accident, life had become a constant struggle. She worked wherever she could, cleaning houses, sewing clothes, and sometimes helping farmers with small chores. The money was never enough, but she never complained. What little she had, she shared. That night she was about to blow out the candle and go to bed when she heard a faint knock on the door. She froze. No one visited this late. The town was quiet after sunset, and strangers rarely came through. The knock came again. This time it was slower, weaker. Martha hesitated, then carefully opened the door. Standing outside was a tall man covered in dust and rain. His clothes were rough and worn like a traveler who had been riding for days. His boots were muddy, and his face looked tired beneath the shadow of his hat. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry to bother you this late, but I was wondering if you might spare a place to rest for the night." Martha studied him carefully. He looked exhausted, maybe even hungry. His horse stood behind him, breathing heavily. She knew what it meant to have nowhere to go. Without another question, she stepped aside. "You can come in," she said gently. The stranger looked surprised. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I don't have money to pay for a room." Martha smiled faintly. "This isn't a hotel," she replied. "It's just a house, and tonight it has space for one more." The man stepped inside, removing his hat respectfully. "My name's Daniel," he said. "Martha," she answered. She brought him a bowl of simple soup she had cooked earlier and some dry bread. It wasn't much, but Daniel ate like he hadn't had a real meal in days. While he ate, Martha prepared a small bed near the fireplace. "You can sleep there," she said. Daniel looked around the humble house. The cracked wooden walls, the patched curtains, the old furniture that had clearly been repaired many times. "You don't have much," he said quietly. "Yet you're sharing it with a stranger." Martha shrugged gently. "Kindness doesn't cost money." Daniel stared at her for a moment, as if those words meant more than she realized. Outside, the wind grew stronger, but inside the house there was a quiet peace. Later that night, after Martha had gone to her room, Daniel sat by the fire staring into the flames. He pulled something from his coat pocket. It was a gold pocket watch engraved with the name Daniel Carter Ranch. Anyone in the region would recognize that name. Daniel Carter owned thousands of acres of land across the state. His ranch was one of the largest cattle operations in the West. But tonight, he had chosen to travel quietly without revealing who he was. For weeks he had been riding through small towns, observing people and the struggles of ordinary life. Wealth had given him everything, except understanding. Until tonight, he looked around Martha's tiny house again. A poor woman who had nothing, yet gave everything. Daniel closed the watch slowly. For the first time in years, he felt something strange in his chest. Respect, and maybe even admiration. The next morning the sun rose softly over the fields. Martha woke early as usual and began preparing tea. Daniel stepped outside to check on his horse. Before leaving, he returned to the doorway. "Thank you for your kindness," he said. Martha smiled. "Safe travels." Daniel tipped his hat and rode away down the dusty road. But as he disappeared into the morning light, one thought remained in his mind. He would come back, and when he did, Martha's life would never be the same again. Episode 2. 5 days passed, and life returned to its usual routine for Martha. She woke before sunrise every morning, gathered water from the well, and worked around the town to earn a few coins. The small house remained quiet, just as it had been for years. The stranger she had helped seemed like nothing more than a passing moment. But on the 5th afternoon, something unusual happened. The entire town began buzzing with excitement. Horses galloped down the streets, and people gathered near the town square. Expensive wagons and well-dressed riders had arrived, something the poor little town rarely saw. Martha was washing clothes near the well when her neighbor rushed over. "Martha," the woman said breathlessly, "did you hear? A famous ranch owner is coming through town. Martha looked confused. Why would someone important come here? They say he's buying land nearby. One of the richest ranchers in the country. Curiosity filled the streets as townspeople gathered to see the arrival. Moments later, a group of riders entered the square. At the center of them was a tall man on a beautiful black horse. His clothes were no longer dusty and worn. He wore a fine coat, polished boots, and a confident posture that made everyone step aside. The town mayor hurried forward to greet him. "Welcome, Mr. Carter," the mayor said respectfully. Martha, standing behind the crowd, froze. Carter. Her heart skipped. The man slowly removed his hat. It was Daniel, the same stranger she had given soup and a bed to. But now he looked completely different. Strong, confident, and clearly powerful. The crowd whispered among themselves. "That's Daniel Carter, the millionaire ranch owner. They say he owns land bigger than this entire town." Martha felt embarrassed. She looked down at her simple clothes, suddenly feeling small among the crowd. She tried to slip away quietly. But Daniel's eyes were already searching the crowd. And then he saw her. "Martha," he said loudly. The crowd turned. Everyone looked at the poor woman standing near the well. Daniel dismounted his horse and walked toward her. The townspeople watched in stunned silence. "Martha," he repeated gently, "I've been looking for you." She looked confused. You're Mr. Carter." He smiled. "I was the stranger you helped." The mayor looked shocked. "You stayed at her house?" Daniel nodded. "One night, when I had nowhere to go." The crowd murmured with disbelief. Daniel turned to Martha. "You didn't know who I was," he said. "You saw a tired traveler and opened your home without asking for anything." Martha looked nervous. "It was just one night," she said softly. But Daniel shook his head. "No," he replied. "It was something much bigger." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "I've spent years building wealth," he said. "But that night reminded me what truly matters." He handed the paper to her. Martha slowly opened it. Her hands began to tremble. It was a legal document. Ownership papers for a small ranch just outside the town. "I bought that land yesterday," Daniel said. "And it belongs to you now." The entire crowd gasped. Martha looked stunned. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "Yes, you can," Daniel replied kindly. "Because kindness like yours deserves a future." Tears filled her eyes as the reality sank in. The woman who had struggled for years, who barely had enough food some nights, now had land, animals, and a chance at a better life. All because she chose kindness when she had nothing to gain. Daniel tipped his hat. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the richest hearts belong to the poorest people." And that day, the town learned a lesson they would never forget.